What's up, everybody? It's your boy Charles, Charles Arnez World, tapping in. Listen, we are checking out. I'm doing a reaction to Rick Ross' book, Hurricanes. This is like a biography of Rick Ross. He's from my home state of Florida. Miami is where he's from. I'm from Orlando. So we're gonna go ahead and play this video. No, I'm sorry, we're gonna play this audio from the book. This is when a lot of his friends started getting locked up and getting shot during the drug era of the late '90s, when the police started cracking down in Florida on the. It's funny. I remember a lot of cats going down for drugs in Orlando that I knew that sold drugs. So anyway, I remember that. Let's go ahead and play this, and I'm gonna go ahead and come back with my reaction. Hit that thumbs up button.
1998 was a major turning point. The Fed started coming down on everybody. Hard. Things had been headed that way for a while. Ronald Reagan's war on drugs fucked up the streets. The Sentencing Reform Act of 1984 had eliminated parole and established mandatory minimums requiring offenders to serve at least 85% of their sentences. 2 years later, at the height of the crack epidemic, Congress passed the Anti-Drug Abuse Act, mandating a minimum sentence of 5 years for possession of 5 grams of crack. But you had to have more than 500 grams to get the same sentence if you were caught with the powder. A small amendment to the Anti-Drug Abuse Act in 1988 put a lot of my homies behind bars. The Conspiracy Amendment made it so that every person involved in a conspiracy could be held accountable for every crime committed within that conspiracy. Now the lookout boy or the bomb man were getting the same sentences as the kingpin.
What?
Due to case processing delays in the courts, the impact of these laws wasn't fully felt until the 90s. That's when niggas started doing a lot of snitching. But it wasn't just the weight niggas was moving that eventually did them in. It was also the bodies they were dropping. On September 6, 1992, Booby got shot 5 times in the parking lot outside of Club Rolex, an infamous Miami strip joint. They said Booby tried to give it to some nigga, but his gun jammed, and the guy gave it to him instead. Booby had scars all across his stomach and had to wear a colostomy bag after that. My corner so polluted, young niggas looting. I studied Kenneth Williams, I'm one hell of a student. Remarkable hustle, my niggas coming home. I kept a candle lit, my nigga never rolled. Niggas caught him slipping, gave him a shit bag. 5 shots to the stomach, Tupac gift pack. Mafia Music 3, Mastermind, 2014. Like the Dadeland Mall shooting in '79, the shootout at Rolex triggered an era of violence the Miami Herald dubbed a decade of death. Once these rival gangs declared war on each other, the Booby Boys in Carroll City, the Thomas family in River City, the John Does in Liberty City, the Vondas in Overtown, Dade County became a combat zone. They started going tit for tat with the killings.
See, now I got family in Miami, right? I didn't know they was going crazy like that. Wow. I mean, I know, Miami is like I would say Miami is like the cocaine capital of America, you know what I'm saying?
On any given day, at any given moment, cars full of niggas with sticks were riding around the city looking for an enemy to open fire on. In 1996 and 97, Miami was the murder capital of the United States. The headlines prompted the formation of a federal task force to put an end to the bloodshed. Their investigation gave birth to the whole Booby Boys thing. That was a name the government came up with so that they could go after all their targets together under the umbrella of organized crime, instead of having to figure out all these unsolved shootings on a case-by-case basis. Booby had been a mentor of mine, and we made plays together, but I was never some lieutenant under him or part of any gang. It just didn't work like that. On February 23, 1998, the task force released the findings of their investigation, pinning 35 homicides and more than 100 shootings on the gang wars between the Booby Boys, the Vondas, the Thomas family, and the John Does. When the federal indictment came down a month later, Booby did the one thing I'd never seen him do. He ran. 4 months later, the feds rushed Jabbar's trap in Southside Jacksonville. I missed that raid by the skin of my teeth.
Wait a minute. If the feds are after you, what are you supposed to do? You supposed to run. What did he think he was, Rick Ross? What did you think he was supposed to do? If you got the federal government after you, you better run.
Been in Jacksonville the week before. The indictment implicated Big Mike, Jabbar, his cousin Tavares, and a few others in a decades-long conspiracy to distribute cocaine and heroin throughout the southeast United States. The way the feds were telling it, Jabbar had followed in his daddy's footsteps and taken over the family business. I found out what happened through 30. 30 was me and Jabbar's little homie. He'd gone to school with Jay at Miami Central and had been running with us in Jacksonville. He was riding shotgun in Jabbar's Chevy when it all went down. They had gotten tipped off by one of Mike's former accomplices that the feds were coming. He'd met up with them and lifted his shirt up to show he was wearing a wire. But we never trusted this guy. Jay thought he was trying to get them to flee the trap so that he could go take the stash or the money they had buried in the back. Jabbar's plan was to go over there, pick up the money, and then get out of town for a little while to be safe. But when they got to the house, there were agents everywhere. 30, being the wild nigga he is, was ready to take him on a high speed, but Jabbar told him to pull over. There was nowhere to run. They had them. The feds brought 30 in for questioning, but he wasn't listed in the indictment. They confiscated the 5 bands he had on him, but eventually let him go. But before they did that, they asked him about me. Throughout the course of their surveillance, the feds had seen 30 and Jabbar coming and going with the big black fat nigga in the truck. That was my car. A 2-tone candy-painted Dodge Ram 1500 on 17-inch chrome Daytons. With everything that was going on, it was too hot for me to be in Florida. I had to get the hell out of Dodge. 30 was in need of a place to lay low as much as I was, and he said he had an older sister in Marietta, Georgia, where we could stay at. We picked up one of 30's buddies, Case, and were on our way. When we got to the house, we were greeted by Tomcat, 30's brother-in-law. At the time he opened his doors to us, Tomcat didn't know that we were on the run, and he most definitely didn't know that we would end up sleeping on his floor for the next 3 months.
Damn.
30 convinced Tomcat to let us stay with him by pitching him on these 2 buddies of his who rapped. Tomcat was working as a runner for some ambulance chaser lawyer at the time, but he was a self-taught audio engineer, and he was trying to make a lane for himself in Atlanta's rap scene. He wanted to put Case and I together in a group called The Connect. I wasn't too interested in being in another group. I already had Triple C's, but Case had a bit of a buzz back home. He'd gotten a feature on Trick Daddy's last album. That made him much more established than I was. Aligning myself with Case might not be a bad idea. One of the lawyers Tomcat worked with claimed to have a line on Shaquille O'Neal. This was when Shaq was in the rap game and had his own imprint under Universal Records called TW Is M. The World Is Mine.
I remember that. I remember when Shaq had, Shaq was with the Magic. Shaq was with Orlando Magic when he first started rapping. I remember he had a record label. I remember he had like a T-shirt and everything with that record label on it. Anyway, y'all hit the thumbs up button. Let's continue on.
I figured this lawyer was fronting, but he actually came through and arranged for us to meet Shaq at the All-Star Cafe on Peachtree Street. Case and I took turns freestyling for Shaq for over an hour. With every punchline I dropped, Shaq was getting more and more excited. One line in particular most definitely got his attention. I'll hit you knee high, slap you straight out your fucking felines. Shaq stood up from his chair and took a lap around the restaurant after that one. We left that dinner meeting convinced that The Connect would soon be offered a deal at TW Is M. But a week later, the lawyer Tomcat had been in touch with got indicted on money laundering charges.
Oh.
Tomcat wasn't able to get back in touch with Shaq's manager, and that was pretty much the end of that.
Damn.
The Connect fizzled out soon after, and Case went back to Miami. The TW Is M situation had been a bust, but Tomcat soon introduced me to 2 important players in my early music career, DJ Greg Street and Russell Big Block Spencer. Greg Street is best known as the host of The Greg Street Show on Atlanta's urban radio station V103. He's hugely influential in Southern hip-hop and has had a hand in a lot of success stories that have come from below the Mason-Dixon line. The same can be said about Block. Niggas know Block as the founder of Block Entertainment, the label behind Boys in the Hood and Young Jock. But this is way before any of that. I was first introduced to Block because I was looking for a weed connect.
Isn't Block the hood cat that got, he ended up getting, I think he ended up getting shot. Wasn't that Candy boyfriend at the time? When she first got on to that was Candy from Escape and Real Housewives of Atlanta. That was her boyfriend when she first got on the first season. I think he ended up getting somebody ended up shooting him, I think, like a year later.
In Atlanta, Block had good weed, but he also had a lot of connections. Block used to hang with Tupac and the Outlaws back when Pac was living in Atlanta, and he took me to meet Pac's cousin Castro. Then he brought me to Noontime Studios, where I met and started building relationships with industry players like Henry Nooney Lee, Ryan Glover, and Chris Hicks. Block plugged me in with a lot of people in Atlanta. most important person Block and Greg Street introduced me to at this time was Tony Draper. Tony Draper was the founder of Suave House, the Houston-based label behind the rise of artists like 8 Ball and MJG, Crime Boss, Tila, and South Circle. Yeah. Draper had partnered with Block and Greg Street to help him establish a Suave House presence in Atlanta. He could see the city was bubbling with talent and fitting the blow. Draper was in the process of building a Suave House satellite office in Dunwoody, but in the meantime, he set up a recording studio in Greg Street's basement at his house in Stone Mountain. Greg Street had Tristan T-Mix Jones staying with him. T-Mix was the in-house producer for Suave House and the genius behind the signature Memphis sound on all the early 8 Ball and MJG albums I'd come up listening to. That smooth, fly player pimp shit. Greg told me that I was welcome to work out of his studio, and as soon as he extended that invitation, I knew I'd be there every day until somebody told me to stop coming. I was such a big fan of 8 Ball and MJG, and the opportunity to record alongside T-Mix was something I had to take full advantage of. It would be the first time I worked with someone who knew more about making music than I did. Greg Street's hospitality extended beyond free studio time. I would raid his fridge for food, and on nights that Tomcat needed a break from hosting me, Greg would let me spend the night. Block was managing an artist named Lil Noah and had gotten Tony Draper to sign him to Suave House. Noah had talent, but he was pretty green when it came to songwriting, so I started helping him put records together. Draper eventually caught wind that there was some big nigga in Greg Street's basement writing all of Noah's raps. So he flew out to Atlanta to see what this Teflon Don cat was all about. That was the name I was going by at the time. I'd repainted my Ram truck purple with ghost flames and gotten Teflon Don album coming soon painted on the side. I was surprised to see that Draper was so young. He was only a year older than me, but had already accomplished so much in the game. It's one thing to do that as an artist. Rapping is a young man's sport. But as an executive and CEO, to come up out of the mud and do it all independent, that shit was impressive. I was working with Noah on a song called Bird Bath when Draper showed up to the studio. He heard me lay my verse on there, and it was all he needed to hear. As soon as I stepped out of the booth, he told me he wanted to sign me to Suave House. "What's your name?" "Teflon Don," I told him. "You're my next 8 Ball, Tef," he said. "You're the next Biggie." After I signed the Suave...
That was his name, Teflon Don? That was Rick Ross' name. I mean, I guess there's nothing wrong with it. It's kind of tight, Teflon Don. It's just hard to see that, being that he's been Rick Ross for so long. Although the name Rick Ross he took from, the legendary drug dealer from L.A., which he's still beefing with that guy. Anyway, let's continue on.
House, Draper started bringing me city to city, taking me to different music conferences and introducing me to his network in the industry. He had quite the Rolodex. Draper took me out to Houston's 5th Ward, where I got to meet and play basketball with Jay Prince in the middle of the night. Jay Prince was the founder of Rap-A-Lot Records, and as far as I was concerned, he was as much of a pioneer as Luke. Jay Prince was the inspiration for a 16-year-old Tony Draper to launch Suave House, and he paved the way for niggas like Master P to launch No Limit Records and for Brian Birdman Williams and his brother to launch Cash Money Records. Rap-A-Lot was the blueprint for building an independent hip-hop label in the South.
Okay, so he said that the dude Tony Draper, which I know who Tony Draper is, from Suave House Records. I wonder, is Tony Draper still around? But I haven't heard anything come out of Suave House for years. But anyway, Tony Draper, being that these guys like Jay Prince and Tony Draper were so young, starting record labels, and even Birdman, I mean, it's a lot easier to start a record label now because, with the internet and everything, you can, it's not as expensive. But back then, you got to think. You had to get tapes, CDs pressed up. You had to go and get, like, right now, you can have a studio right in your apartment. You know what I'm saying? But back then, you had to go and get studio time. So you got to pay for studio time, an engineer. Like, you had to have money to get into the record game back then. So it's like, these guys, like, they had to do some street shit to be able to do that. Oh, sorry, y'all.
Draper knew that meeting a Southern king like Jay Prince was a dream come true for me. But he wanted to get me rapping over some East Coast beats. So he flew me out to New York to work with Redman and Eric Sermon. Redman picked me up at the airport in his BMW X5 truck. I couldn't believe it was him that came to get me. Red was riding high from the success of Doc's The Name 2000 and Blackout, 2 critically acclaimed platinum-selling albums. Before we headed out to Eric Sermon's crib in Long Island, we stopped in Harlem to pick up a jar from Branson. Branson was the infamous weed man to the stars. I'd heard his name in the raps of Redman, Biggie, Mace, and Rakim. He was the inspiration behind Samson, the drug dealer character in a new stoner comedy called Half Baked, starring Dave Chappelle. I hadn't been in New York yet.
I heard about the guy, Branson. He was like the premier weed dealer. He didn't sell anything but weed. That's probably why the police kind of let him kind of just slide, even though weed was legal in New York. You know, they really wanted to bust people doing like hardcore stuff like cocaine and crack and stuff like that. So I heard about Branson, but I didn't know that the guy Samson, which is the same, it's almost the same name, the character Samson that Dave Chappelle played, the drug dealer. No, he was a rapper in that movie. He wasn't no drug dealer. He was a rapper. He played Samson was I'm sorry. Samson was the guy, well, he was the drug dealer played by Link Hayes from the Mod Squad. He played Samson. And then Green Eyes was the rapper persona that Dave Chappelle played. Anyway, y'all, sorry, let's continue on. Hit that thumbs up button.
An hour, and everything about it was surreal. I was really here sitting in the back of Redman's truck. We just picked up weed from Branson, and now we were on our way over to Eric Sermon's house. Redman was a bona fide superstar at this time, but the fact that I was about to cut a few records in the Green Eyed Bandit's basement was what really fucked me up. I came of age in rap's golden era, and EPMD had a major influence on me. I'm getting ahead of myself here, but my whole Maybach music series of songs was inspired by EPMD's Jane saga, where every album they put out had a new song that continued the Jane character storyline.
I didn't know that.
As we rode past Shea Stadium, I remember...
Anyway, y'all, go hit that thumbs up button, y'all. I'm going to go ahead and cut off right here. If you want to go ahead and get his book, it's called Rick Ross, Hurricanes and Memoir. You can listen to it on Spotify if you got a Spotify account, or you can get it on Audible. So what do y'all think about this, man? Leave your comments and subscribe to Charles and Ezra. Appreciate it.